When it comes to the Skylanders franchise, it has a lot of playable characters throughout all of its games, and I don't think a lot of you guys realize how insane of a roster it has compared to other video games. Here's an example. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate has 89 characters, if you include DLC characters like Kazuya and the Absolute Demons that are Steve and Alex, and the game has the biggest roster in that franchise. Looking back to the Skylanders franchise, by the time Imaginators faded away, it had over 175 playable characters, and once I did the math, Smash Ultimate's roster is half the size of the Skylanders roster, excluding Legendary and all of the other variants that the Skylanders have. It's quite obvious to me that there's a borderline insane amount of Skylanders part of the organization, which makes it less of a surprise that many of these Skylanders would be forgotten or just left behind over time. This would happen to many Skylanders over time, a Skylander being forgotten from nearly every game, but the first Skylanders to be forgotten are a group from SSA known as the Forgotten Eight, a group of Skylanders that we're going to discuss today. We're going to be going over some of the forgotten Skylanders from Spyro's Adventure. So without further ado, let's get straight into this.
For the win!
When it comes to Forgotten 8, I think Warnado stands out the most to me for a multitude of reasons, one of the biggest being his voice. It's just so unnecessarily deep, I felt like I was being hit by a flashbang when I first heard it. But with that out the way, let's get straight into this. Before Warnado even hatched, he was sucked out of his nest in a Skyland swamp by a magical twister and carried away by it, and while he was still in the storm, he decided that that would be the perfect moment for him to hatch. At first, Warnado was completely at the twister's mercy, but over time, he would get used to being in the twister, and apparently it was sentient because he would be taught and shown not only magical wind tricks, but elemental secrets on top of that. By the time Warnado became an adult, he was as skilled as some of Skyland sorcerers, but one day, the twister that he lived in collided with a storm of dark magic, which knocked Warnado out of the twister and onto solid ground for the first time in his life. Now, you would think that this would be a pretty exciting moment for Warnado, but it was actually the complete opposite. For Warnado, being on solid ground was actually extremely nauseating for the turtle since he wasn't used to being still. Realizing this, Warnado would continue to spin out on his own, and he would continue to do this across Skylands until he was spotted by Whirlwind. Whirlwind would present the turtle to Eon, and the Portal Master would somehow get him to stay still long enough to join the Skylanders, and he would make a cameo in Spyro vs. the Mega Monsters. Now, the biggest thing that I want to talk about when it comes to Warnado's backstory is the relationship between him and Whirlwind. Now, Whirlwind clearly saw something in Warnado, but it's never said what, and I honestly don't think that she would simply see a spinning turtle with spikes and go, that would be the perfect Skylander, Eon would be hyped about this one. I have a feeling that Whirlwind and Warnado traveled across Skylands together and she would see his skills before bringing him to Eon, but it's not like Eon really cares who joins them. But with that out the way, let's get on to the next Skylander of today.
Race for the mace!
When it comes to everyone else a part of the Forgotten 8, Wham Shell throws me for a loop the most, not because of his design or anything, but why he was even forgotten in the first place. He not only has a really good design that not only makes him look pretty cool and aligned with his theme, but it also makes him stand out from the other water Skylanders. Like, out of all the water Skylanders to be forgotten, why did it have to be this one? But with that out the way, let's get started. Wham Shell used to be a long-standing ruler of a kingdom deep within the oceans of Skylands, which for a long time knew nothing but peace. Well, at least until the kingdom came into conflict with a legion of oil-drilling trolls, and they did so much damage that they basically scattered his kingdom to the wind. Arming himself with a powerful mace that had been handed down from one king to the next for a multitude of generations, Wham Shell quickly got to work on pushing the trolls out of his kingdom, but by the time he finished in his endeavor, the damage was already done. His kingdom was gone, and his people were completely scattered, and with nowhere else to go, he would go join the Skylanders, joining them to make sure an atrocity like that never happened again. The Skylander making an appearance in Gil Grunt vs. the Fishmaster. Now with that out the way, I think that Wham Shell's story is pretty interesting for a multitude of reasons, so let's tackle the big one that spiked my interest the most. Out of all the troll attacks I've seen in these bios, they're usually described a lot like takeovers or quick smash and grabs. Yes, they do a lot of damage, but it isn't really that serious. But when it comes to Wham Shell's kingdom, it's described as an atrocity. Now, to many people this may just seem like a random word, but to people like me who do theory crafting and writing for a living, we know how different of an outcome you can get by changing a word in a text or a story. And according to Bing, the definition of atrocity is, quote, an extremely wicked or cruel act, typically involving physical violence or injury. Now, the second I checked the definition to make sure I wasn't making a mountain out of a molehill, the gears in my head began to turn, and quickly. Throughout all of the lore I've read so far, I don't think I've seen the trolls act this aggressive towards anything before, or at least the ones under Chaos. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen anything the lore beforehand described as an atrocity, even when the darkness was at play, which makes me think that there's something more going on between the two species. But that requires a lot of assumptions that I don't have any solid evidence for. Speaking of his kingdom, what happened to his people? All his biography really says is that they were scattered to the wind and they just disappeared completely, which makes me think that his kingdom consisted of multiple different creatures if they were able to move on that quickly. This also raises another question of how does the ocean even work in Skylands? If there's a kingdom at the bottom of the sea, that somewhat implies that there's an ocean floor as well. Like, I know it might be able to be like a floating island at the bottom of like a glob of water or something, but still, it's pretty interesting to think about. I'd love to dig into this more, but I'm starting to eat into the time to discuss the final Skylander, and I don't think that you guys would like me to make a video going over only 2 of them. So with that out the way, let's get into that said Skylander.
Roast and toast.
When it comes to the members of the Forgotten Eight, they would all be remembered somewhat by the Skylanders team due to the fact that all of them would get a repose of sorts. Well, everybody except for one. Sunburn. If we were running the Oppression Olympics, Sunburn would have so much gold that he could make his own Eon's Elite, because holy hell, he was done absolutely dirty by Toys for Bob, and IDW themselves would jump in to spit on him as well. But with that out the way, let's get right into his backstory. Years before Sunburn's birth, many soothsayers and psychics had predicted it, so when he was catapulted into the world from his nest into the center of a volcano, everyone wanted to meet the Phoenix Dragon hybrid, many of them for pretty sinister reasons. He would be able to fend them off with his fire powers and make quick getaways with his teleportation, but because of this he could never stay in one place, making him think that Skylands as a whole was a dangerous place for him. Well, until he met Eon. Eon had been aware of the Phoenix Dragon for a while, and decided to make him a Skylander, which not only granted him a form of protection, but gave him a license to incinerate evil, along with a home with the other Skylanders that he would occasionally play pranks on, and he would make an appearance in Stump Smash vs. the Bone Dragon, where he would be frozen for half of it, which... oh my goodness, I don't even know where to begin on that, so I'll just leave that alone for a minute. Now, when it comes to Sunburn, the biggest question I have is where are his parents and how does he even exist? I know that it might work because of how eggs works, but the difference here is one is a lizard and the other is a bird. I know I'm hyperanalyzing, but still, this is the one time where I'm glad Eon stepped in and did something, because not only does he have a new Skylander, but he also got him a form of protection in a place that he could call home to boot. But with that out the way, I think that's where I'm gonna end this video. Like always, hit the subscribe button if you enjoy content like this, share this around so I can grow the channel, leave some comments down below to make the algorithm happy, and once again, I will see you all in the next one.